You're listening to the DFO Rundown podcast with Frank Saravalli and Jason Gregor on dailyfaceoff.com.
Welcome to episode 48 of the DFO Rundown at dailyfaceoff.com. I'm Jason Gregor along with Frank Saravalli coming to you once again live from the woodjerseys.com studio. And if you missed their video of the new Kraken jersey, it was awesome. It looks fantastic. You can get all of them. The new ones at the NHL, of course, Frank has the Toronto Maple Leafs. I've got the Boston Bruins. They have lots of other team and Kraken fans. You can get yours at woodjerseys.com. It'll look awesome in your fan cave, in your office, or wherever you like. Frank, how are you doing? Are you rested? Have your fingers healed up, Frank? Because you were a tweeting machine earlier this week.
Yeah, feeling good. It was a good week for Daily Faceoff.
Yeah, it was awesome. We're surprised when the draft unfolded, when you look at all the talent that was available to Seattle, and I understand the theory that cap space is important, but so is talent. And they really seem to value cap space more than talent at this point.
Well, I understand why. And the reason for that is everyone seems kind of flush right now. Everyone's got a little flexibility. And that's not to say some teams aren't in cap trouble, but they're going to be spending again. RFAs need deals. Guys are going to need new deals a year from now. And the thing is, Seattle, I think, has recognized that the crunch isn't coming this year. And the reason for that is Seattle has injected $81.5 million new dollars into the total system. And so when you think about it, you know, Seattle by its nature was an escape valve, a release valve for a lot of teams. I mean, look at the Tampa Bay Lightning. For the first time in a long time, they're under the cap. And I think the big thing moving forward is they know that the real crunch is coming next summer. It's next summer when the cap is flat again at 81.5, or maybe we get a bump to 82.5 if revenues really come back. That's when Seattle is really going to be able to take advantage and harvest a lot of talent, not just in trades, but also on the free agent market, because teams are going to have to let guys walk. And so I think that's the play for Seattle, that it's a multi-year play. And I think if we're all being honest, everyone wants to compare the Kraken to the Vegas Golden Knights and look at what they drafted on night one and look at who's going to be their Jonathan Marchessault, who's going to be their Riley Smith, who's going to be so-and-so, who's going to be their Shea Theodore. I got to tell you, it's revisionist history. Go back and watch and read the reviews from the Vegas Golden Knights opening night of their draft. I was in Vegas. I was there. And we all walked out of that arena looking at each other saying Vegas just drafted a pile of shit. I'm telling you, that's the reaction that a lot of people had in the hockey world then. And they were better than they ever realized. They were heading into the season thinking, here's the 5 guys we're going to trade before the deadline if we can flip them. And they got to December and they said, holy crap, we're actually good. And it was a surprise to them. And I'm not saying the Kraken can't do that. They've got some work to do. I think they have a few foundational pieces that make sense. And they do have some talent. But I do think that there were some spots where the Kraken overthought it. And I think there were some spots where the Kraken underthought it.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I would agree with you. Comparing to Vegas is not good, because if you actually go back and look at Vegas's season, 5 of their top 6 scorers had career highs. Never before, never again. Eric Holla, 29 goals and 55 points. Marchessault had 75 points. Carlson had 43 goals, for goodness sakes. Riley Smith had a career high of 60. Perron, 66. And then, Frank, probably the craziest part of that Vegas inaugural season was Marc-Andre Fleury got injured. Marc-Andre Fleury played 46 games. They had 3 goaltenders with a combined 2 NHL games experience.
And they didn't lose, seemingly.
Legacy, and then Oscar Dansk. They won 22 of the 36 games they started. They went 22-11-3. It was mind-blowing. Really,
those guys aren't even with the team anymore.
No, I know. That's my point. Like, these guys, it's not like they were rookies who then went on to be great goaltenders. They were rookies where Subban's the only one. He's a backup now, and the other 2 guys aren't even in the league. And so Seattle, I think, is wise to not swing for the fences. I think it's a little bit unrealistic. I think also when you look at their draft, they've got 8 left defensemen. They're obviously going to be trading a few of those guys because defensemen, we know are at a premium at some point. I expected them to take a lot of NHL defensemen. There was a few choices that I was a little perplexed by. And I thought, okay, maybe there's a trade coming. Well, there is no trade coming. So now we'll see what they do in the next few months. But I get the sense that Seattle is actually going to be very patient in their organization. Well, there was lots of talk from ownership that, yeah, we really want to compete. They'll be competitive in the sense that I don't think they're going to be the Atlanta Thrashers by any stretch of the imagination. And I saw the Atlanta Thrashers old Twitter account saying Yannick Tremblay was the best player we were able to draft back then.
Which said a lot.
Yeah, that's true. Right.
And I think this team as currently constituted, and I think it'll look a lot different over the next 10 or 15 days. I think they're a borderline playoff team. I kind of see them like 5th, 6th, 7th in the division. I don't think they're going to be the worst team in the Pacific. And I'll give you 2 examples just to follow up on what I was saying about underthinking it and overthinking it. The one that I look at and I say, they kind of overthought was the selection from the Flyers. Now you had James Van Riemsdyk, you had Jake Voracek, and you had Shane Gostisbehere on the board. Now I understand, going back to the cap space theme, that you want to preserve that space, and I also understand the roster requirements and what they needed to select. But Carson Twarynski is a borderline NHL player. Not saying he's not going to be, but Robert Hagg is a full-blown NHL defenseman that can play on any team's third pair and is cheap. So to think that you didn't take Hagg, who is a bona fide player and is still relatively young and has something to offer, I just think that's a miss, say nothing of the other guys that you have. And then in a spot where I think they underthought it was the fact that they didn't do exactly what we were projecting that they should do with the Tampa Bay Lightning. Plucking Yanni Gourde, who I have no problem with. He's still the player, aside from Jamie Alexiak, who they freshly signed, that has the longest term of any player picked with 4 years left. You had to squeeze Tampa there because you gave them a get out of jail free card. They were over the cap and really had no way to get under, aside from the fact that Seattle taking one of these high-priced players off their hand in a Gourde or a Palat or Johnson or whoever in that $5 million range. And so the fact that they didn't say, we're taking Matthew Joseph, who I think actually can outscore Yanni Gourde this season on a cheap cap hit, and then make them throw in a player, maybe they had the conversation, and maybe it's possible that Julien Brisebois just said, go ahead and take Joseph, and Seattle chickened out. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. But I would have still taken Joseph anyway, because I think he can be better than Yanni Gourde is.
Yeah, I like Yanni Gourde a lot. I think Ron Francis really values the center position, and the fact that Yanni Gourde can, he can play defensive zone starts. He's kind of can be on an energy line. He can chip in offensively if you like, and likes his versatility and maybe his character. He's feisty as well. But yeah, Joseph is a young player that I'm very curious to see.
24 years old, plays center. And I'll bet you right now, Jason, he scored 12 in 56 games without a wink of power play time. I'm going to wager right now, a steak dinner next time I'm in Edmonton, that Matthew Joseph scores 25 goals this year.
25? Okay, we're on. 25 Genos. All right, I'm on for that. Perfect. I love it. I got some good restaurants to take you to, Frank, so that'll be great. Now,
hey, I'll be in. Hey, I'm coming in August. I'm coming.
Oh, I know you're coming for the
Oilers Nation golf tournament. Yeah.
How's your golf game?
It's actually really struggled. I played.
I like how you say that, like you're surprised. Like, are you a really good golfer or something?
No, I'm actually somewhat consistent.
Okay.
And I just haven't had the headspace for it. There's been so much going on between covering the league and daily face-off. I went and I tried to play like 10 days ago with my buddies, and I'm usually kind of like mid to high 80s. Maybe low 90s. In a span of 6 shots, I hit 5 out of bounds. And I was like, we actually were playing a match in a tournament at our club, and we lost in the 12th hole. It was unbelievable.
Rattled.
Totally
Of
rattled.
course, today is episode 48, and it's entry draft day. A big day for lots of kids, young players and their families, as they will be drafted to the National Hockey League. It seems like Owen Power will be number one. Brad Allen from Hockey Prospect will join us today on the show to break down the draft. And really, if people are listening today, you're going to be able to go back on the weekend and listen to what Brad has to say about the players that your team drafted. And that's kind of what our strategy is going to be today. We're not going to project who's going to go where. We're more so going to be like get an analysis on the top players, lots of guys at different places in the first round. There's 2 goaltenders that teams are very high on, and you look at the importance of goaltenders. So we'll get into that. Brad, of course, is the international scout. He's also a goalie scout. So it'll be fun to talk to him. And usually, Frank, there's lots of trades, but Ken Holland today was interesting. He felt that he thinks it might be a little bit quieter at the trade front just because there's been so much talk lately that he thinks it might not happen till later. What's your sense? Because often we do see a few players either leading up, and there was, of course, the trade yesterday between Detroit, and even Gostisbehere going to Arizona. But do you get a sense that any of those big names that are on the market are going to move today or tomorrow?
I don't get a sense with guys like Seth Jones or Tarasenko, for instance. I really wonder about Eichel, and I can tell you that everyone's on high alert. And the reason for that is this. I wrote in my icebreaker story today on dailyfaceoff.com that the New York Rangers, I think, if I were to handicap the race at this point, I think the New York Rangers are the team that's the odds-on favorite to land Jack Eichel. And I know that they had been asking around to other teams, hey, can we get inside the top 10? What is it going to cost for your pick? And it's interesting because the Rangers are picking at 16, and you're saying, okay, not all that unusual for a team to want to get into the top 10, especially with, as we'll talk about, the players being so closely grouped inside this top 10. But what's interesting is the Sabres are asking for another lottery type pick. And I think if you see that go down on Friday, it's probably a pretty good indication that something is up. And so the Rangers were asking around about that. And I think that's the exact motivation was they're trying to get Jack Eichel. They want that extra pick. Buffalo has made it clear that they want another high end first round. They don't want, 27th overall. They want like something inside the top 10 that they can add to that number 1 pick that they have. And so, in addition to the bevy of young picks or young players, picks and prospects that they're looking to get back. So to talk about some of the other teams that are in the mix, I think the Anaheim Ducks are very, very interested. I think there was a time period where they were like, you know what, the price is too high. And I think they've circled back and have now gotten back in it. I still wonder about the Los Angeles Kings, whether they're potentially or have the potential to get back in that mix. And then I think moving forward, like there's got to be some stealth team out there. People have talked about Minnesota. They're not stealth at all. I just don't think that they have the ability to give Buffalo what they really want. And so I don't know, if you had to pick a stealth team for Jack Eichel, who would you think makes sense?
That's a really good question. Like, I wonder if Minnesota, do you think they would part with Fiala? Would that be a starting point just because of the contract? Because when all the dead cap space they got moving forward, I'm not sure they can afford Kaprizov and Fiala and Eichel. Maybe I'm wrong on that.
No, I think you're right on that, but I think the thing is Buffalo doesn't want roster players.
Right. Well, you're going to have to take some. You're giving up $10 million in cap space. I don't think anyone can take Jack Eichel without giving some cap space up.
There's a few teams that could. Los Angeles could, for instance.
Yeah, maybe. But I think either they'd want some salary going back, I think, at some point. And if you're trading Jack Eichel, man, that's like you're basically committing to a complete full-on rebuild. Then you might as well trade Ristolainen, and you might as well trade Reinhart as well. Because if you're taking Eichel for only prospects and picks, man, that's a 3-4 year kick the can down the road strategy.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's what I think everyone, I wonder about the Islanders. Like, do the Islanders make any sense for Jack Eichel? Lou's got cap space for the first time in a while.
Yeah. That would kind of seem to go against everything he's always done. But obviously he keeps things pretty close to the vest. If I'm going to say a stealth team that might shock a lot of people, I'm going to say the Colorado Avalanche.
What about Boston?
Wow, they just signed. They signed Hall. It's 6 per. Well, they probably, Buffalo, there'd have to be some contracts going back there for sure, because Boston just couldn't afford him if there's not money going out.
Yeah, it's really
hey, I get it. And I'm sure Jack Eichel would probably love to play there, right? The whole Boston College connection. I totally get it. So,
and my antenna is up, by the way, about the Philadelphia Flyers. You don't make a trade like that with Shane Gostisbehere, moving your second and your 7th just to dump his salary, unless you have something. And I wouldn't be surprised at all to see them make some type of move on defense. Now, I think one name that's been out there is David Savard trading for his rights. And if you think about the salary structure, he's probably kind of in that, same sort of Shane Gostisbehere $4.5 million range. The key with David Savard, I think, is going to be term, because I think that guy has some wear and tear on those tires.
Yeah.
But I think, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say on David Savard, Frank, watching the playoffs. Now, granted, Tampa's a great team, but compared to those other defense, his mobility really, or lack of it, kind of stood out to me. And I just, he to me looks like a player who, experience, does everything well, but the tread could wear off pretty quickly on those tires.
I mean, I've talked to some other teams about Savard, and they say we'd go no longer than 2 years, which I think makes a lot of sense. I think he was exposed in a bit in Tampa. He also couldn't really get comfortable. He played on 3 different pairs, and it took a while. So the other name that I've heard with the Flyers, and I think it's really interesting because I can't get a real grasp on what they're doing. Josh Manson from the Anaheim Ducks.
Yeah.
I think the Flyers and Chuck Fletcher actually made it clear in his press conference today after Shane Gostisbehere that they're really looking for a right shot defenseman. I think Manson is a pretty prime target for exactly what they're going after. The thing is, they better be giving up a lot to get him.
Another team that would like to get him is the Edmonton Oilers, because with Adam Larson leaving, there's a huge hole on the right side. I know they're having conversations, of course, with Tyson Barrie, very different style defenseman. Like if you add Tyson Barrie and you've got Bouchard and you've got Bear, I'm not sure that's a successful long-term makeup. All 3 are NHL players, but they're all similar in their styles. And I just think it's almost too much of the same thing. Edmonton, I understand why they would re-sign Tyson Barrie. You can't lose Barrie and Larson. That's 2 of your top 4 defensemen in one offseason. It's pretty difficult to want to, look like you're moving forward per se. And they're high on Evan Bouchard. I think Evan Bouchard is going to come in this season and he's going to be an everyday player for Edmonton. And I think he's actually going to be quite good. It's a very smart player, very calm, poised with the puck. And I think he actually learned a lot just by being around. I know he didn't get to play as much, but he learned more, I think, from that than he would have, playing 15 to 18 games in the American League had they sent him down. So he's an interesting player to me to watch, Frank. And I wonder if Tyson Barrie is signed, then I could see in the future a trade involving Ethan Bear.
That was actually the next question I was going to ask you. Is he in there for the long haul if you do re-sign Barrie?
It becomes a question because I just, and I think Ethan Bear will have some value. So like, just because you trade, some people sometimes think that trading a player means that he's not good. There's lots of really good players that are being traded for, and it's about fit and situations. And I know Oiler fans, many of them would be livid if they re-sign Barrie over Bear. But here's the thing. Tyson Barrie is an infinitely better offensive player than Ethan Bear. Now, Ethan Bear, I think, is better defensively. I'm not sure that he's drastically better, like Barry's drastically better offensively. You just look at his production over the last 8 seasons. But with Evan Bouchard coming, Evan Bouchard's a guy who's going to need puck touches. He's going to need to be in the offensive zone. He's going to need, I think, to be on the power play. So I'm kind of fascinated to see if they sign Barrie, where, how do they juggle him and Bouchard, because they want to get the youngsters some looks, and you got to get puck touches. Offensive players need puck touches on the power play. It allows them to be better a lot of times 5-on-5.
Well, the Oilers could have some real cap space flexibility, even with a guy like Zach Hyman in the fold at the numbers that have been reported. If you decide to move on from Zach Kassian, and if you buy out James Neal, which we expect to be coming, and if you want to go down the path and buy out Mikko Koskinen and just have, Stalock and Smith playing a cheap tandem, even with Koskinen's money on the buyout, they're still only at $4.2 million for the three of those goalies. So they can get creative. They could even go out and get another goalie if they wanted to at that point, and they had the flexibility. But, to think of, the possibilities that Ken Holland can still play with here is really interesting. And, just going back to Bear for a second, I just wish we could all kind of get a glimpse of what he would be like, if he was really in shape and had, came to camp ready to play.
Yeah, that was, it cost him a healthy scratch last year. And, young players, that'll happen. And hopefully he's learned from it and he'll be better. As for the buyouts, there's only going to be one. Ken Holland confirmed to me when I asked him about that today. It'll be one buyout, probably one. And it would seem more likely that it's James Neal. Although I'm a big anti-buyout guy. I don't like dead cap space. Tampa is the only team that's ever won the cup with dead cap space when they had Matt Carl at 1.8 million back in 2020. Other than that, cup winning teams don't have dead cap space. And I know that the cap's supposedly supposed to go up, but I wouldn't like it if I was an Oilers fan. But they're in win now. They're in be competitive for 4 years window. And that's why Zach Hyman, it's going to be our 7 or 8 year deal, Frank, hopefully for them, so they can lower the cap hit. Now I'm curious about that because, if you go to 8 years, that means it's a sign and trade with Toronto. Toronto signs him, then they trade him, and there's going to be some sort of compensation. I'm not sure how high that compensation will be, knowing that if Edmonton waits till next Wednesday, they would just sign Zach Hyman for 7 years.
6th round pick. Like, what does that call? I don't know that it makes sense to first trade an asset and then second go the 8 years. Like, what does that contract look like in the 7th and 8th year anyway?
Oh, well, they're only doing that to, like Nugent Hopkins, to lower the AAV to 5
right,
million.
but it's not that, to go from 5.5 to a shade over 5, like the $400,000, is it worth really going an extra year? What does that look like on the 8th year?
Totally fair, man. Totally fair. I get it. And that's why, trust me, Oilers fans are a little concerned about the future long-term.
I know, and I get it, but I thought it was really interesting. Our friend Craig Button, he was, sort of sizing up what the Oilers would be getting with Zach Hyman. He said, if he plays with Connor McDavid could have 150 points. And I was thinking like, wow, 150 points. But then I was like, it is McDavid, so it's not really that shocking. But
no, he was on pace for more than that this year.
Yeah, but still, the fact, he obviously didn't get there, but the fact that Zach Hyman does a lot of the things that the Oilers stylistically really need. It's not just the goals. Obviously, he has a finishing capability, but it's to do the dirty work to get the puck to those guys that I think, the Oilers have also been missing at the same time.
Yeah, no, that's fair. It's very fair. Let's get to our big guest, delivered by DoorDash. Proud to welcome DoorDash to the DFO Rundown. Of course, a big sponsor across the Nation network, and they will deliver right to your door some of your favorite restaurants that you can have delivered, comfort of your own home. It's convenient. And if you've never used the app, it's your first time, you can use the promo code RUNDOWNDD, and that will get you 25% off and free delivery. So it's a great deal. Once again, and Rundown DD, delivered by DoorDash. All right, let's get to our DoorDash big guest, as we are joined by, from hockeyprospect.com, Brad Allen. He's the international crossover scout. He's also the goalie scout for hockeyprospect.com. He's been a scout for 10 years. And Brad, welcome to the DFO Rundown. Appreciate your time. How you doing?
Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate getting an opportunity to come here and talk about the draft.
Well, hey, this draft today is unheralded. We've never seen anything like this. You've been scouting for 10 years. I've talked to a lot of scouts, and they admit there's lots of uncertainty, more than there ever has been before, just because there was so limited in actual, eye views. They watched on video, but you just didn't get to see a lot of players in person. How much of a challenge was it for you? What did you find as a 10-year scout that made you maybe question yourself or frustrated you the most with the process this year of not being able to see so many of the kids live?
Well, being an international crossover scout for a company that doesn't have the same budget as, say, an NHL team, part of my job is to look at some obscure prospects that are in difficult hockey markets to see unless you're willing to spend a lot of money to travel to places such as, say, Latvia or Germany or the Czech Republic, and it's basically all over Europe and around the globe. So from that perspective, I already had some video scouting experience. That said, despite my experience, I can say right now that it doesn't matter how much experience I can get, it will never beat a live viewing. Right. And that's one of the biggest issues with this entire draft class. And the reason I say it will never beat a live viewing is because depending on the video angle with the camera relative to the ice surface, you're going to have a much more difficult time assessing skating mechanics within players. You're going to have a more difficult time looking at speed differential, meaning how fast, slow a player can move from A to B, depending on the video quality because of the frame rate. Right, it can get choppy, it can get delayed, it can get laggy. If it's too close to the ice surface, it's just hard to see separation relative to the opposing players that you're looking at. So there's a lot that goes into it from a speed perspective. And of course, as you guys know, speed kills. Speed's remarkably important in the NHL. And so just to having the skating aspect being limited in terms of being able to scout it correctly through video is severely limiting in terms of just being able to create an overall evaluation and ranking properly. The other aspects that go into this are the almost more psychological aspects. For instance, when you're in a rink, you can get that the rhythm, the tempo, the flow of a game, and see how that prospect reacts to that flow. How much of it is in a factor of being able to create a momentum swing in the given context of each game, right? And that's taken out when you're watching on video as well. So you're losing what they look like in terms of their mannerisms at the bench. You're losing their energy. You're losing their skating mechanics. And if you're looking at it from odd angles, if you're looking at a defensive prospect, you might lose them entirely in the play. You can't see them positionally because they might be outside of the camera range. And so all these factors have to be taken into consideration when you're looking at video scouting.
So because that was such a big part of it this year, are teams, do you think they're going to shy away from players that they haven't seen live, or will they have enough confidence in their video scouting to draft them?
I think 100% we'll see teams shy away from players they haven't seen live. And it really does come back to what I just said about the skating specifically and the positional awareness of defensemen. This is a class that's actually known to have more defensive depth than 2020's class, which is actually arguably the only area that it was superior in. But I think because of that, you're going to see a lot of teams say, hey, let's focus on even some OHLers that we saw a lot last season. Think like a Wyatt Johnston coming out of the Windsor Spitfires, for instance. He's a player who I liked a lot last season, but he only played at the U18s this year. So I think a lot of teams will say, hey, we saw him live in Windsor. We know what he's capable of developing into. Just because we got one live tournament doesn't mean we don't have a big enough sample. So I could see a player like him going a lot higher than a player who might actually have more talent than him, who was in a more obscure league, such as the MHL, which is the Russian Junior League, where they didn't get as many eyes on them. So I think you're going to see a lot of that this year. And I think it's going to be, out of any draft, I think it's pretty obvious. This will be the most unpredictable draft.
Brad, taking a second to look through your NHL Draft Black Book here from hockeyprospect.com, really valuable resource. You guys have 18 players with an A grade. You mentioned the depth of this draft. How does that stack up to the previous years? How deep, in your opinion, is this draft?
You know what, Frank, I think a lot of people are saying the same narrative, which is this is the worst class in a decade, or it's right there with 2012 as being the worst class. I would disagree with that, honestly. I don't think it's as bad as 2012's. However, if you were to compare it to classes, say, from 2016 to 2020, is it as good as those classes? No, it's not. However, if you're a team that's sitting in the top 15, I think you're actually going to end up with a pretty good player. It's just one of the biggest differences between this class and a lot of other classes are, one is it's a bad skating class. And that's even more compounded by what I said earlier about seeing everything on video. So that's one aspect that needs to be taken into consideration. The other is that you got to take in a lot more variables with each player this year, even if they're highly, highly rated. So for instance, when you're looking at prospects like Brandt Clark, like Luke Hughes, like Simon Edvinsson, okay, those types of players have a lot of potential. They have high ceilings, but they also have a lot of red flags. And so because of that, it's one of those situations where on paper you could say, yes, theoretically, if things go really right in their development, they can end up being star caliber players, but they're longer away from a lot of other players that are usually in that 10 to 15, or I should say 1 to 15 range relative to other seasons.
Well, the headlines have been dominated. Obviously, people talking about Owen Power, and you mentioned Luke Hughes and all the other guys in that mix in the top 5, and sort of how closely bunched they are. Like, I'm fascinated to see where Matty Beniers goes, for instance. But I want to take a deeper dive and ask you about the most fascinating name for me on the list is Chaz Lucius. 48 goals in 51 games played. Like that, he does the hardest thing that there is to do in the league, in the game. Where, in looking at Bob McKenzie's rankings, which aren't scouting rankings at all, they're actually just an average of all, 10 different scouts that he talks to. I think he has Lucius right at 10. You have him at 16. Where does he go, and what's his upside?
Your guess is as good as mine in terms of where he goes. It really depends on the comfort a team will have with the red flags. So again, so you're right when you say, you look at his goal rates, and that's the hardest thing there is to do. And it's what you're always looking for on the draft floor is you can find those 25, 30 goal projected goal scorers. You're going to draft them high, right? There's a couple issues with Chaz Lucius. One of the main issues is that he, as of now, is a center, but we think he's projected to be a winger, right? So that decreases his value to a degree. The other aspect is that if you took his skating base and you look at it in terms of where he could be developmentally, we think it falls pretty flat. Sometimes in skating bases, you can correct certain mechanics within them. In Chaz Lucius's case, I don't think they're very correctable. You're looking at more how much fast twitch, how much peak power output can you develop in him over a 4 to 5 year period when you're looking at the strength and conditioning side of the equation. Now, in Chaz's case, he does have some tools that help him minimize the risk associated with the skating. So for instance, if you can't skate very well, you have to be very smart, right? You have to have hockey sense in order to be able to compensate. You also have to have a high skill level. So he has those attributes. He's very deceptive. He has good spatial awareness. He's very good at recognizing his timing. He's good at getting into soft ice areas and being able to track rebounds correctly. He's very good at recognizing seams on a goaltender when something's opened up, hence why he's got so many goals, right? So there's aspects to him that are extremely impressive. But when you look at the game right now, the modern NHL is built for transition. He is not going to be a player that's going to be very good in transition. He is not going to be a line driver at the NHL level. When we put our rankings together, we always try to get the line drivers in that top 10 to 15 range. Always. So that's why Chaz Lucius falls directly out of that range, because to us, he's a very complimentary winger who can definitely score you 30 goals, but he's not the driver of play, and he's not a possession driver through the neutral zone.
And Jay, before you jump in, the one thing, just kind of more so commentary, not even necessarily a question, because I'm not knocking, exactly what you just said or your rankings at all. One of the things that drives me nuts about scouting in general is scouts always kind of point out, and this is, again, not directed at you, all these things that a guy can't do or isn't very good at, or the red flags that exist. And I just think to Cole Caulfield going in that sort of same range, so recently, when you have such a unique ability to find the back of the net, it's like you find ways to knock these guys down. Like a Cole Caulfield, totally different player than Lucius, for instance, but he scores. And it was like, well, the knock was his size. He's going to get pushed around. He's not going to be able to make it. And it's like, then you see a guy like him have an impact that he's had. And it's like, well, that's exactly what we said would happen given the way that he scored when he was in his draft year.
Yeah, it's a good point. One thing that's funny about a scout's job is like some scouts are pretty grumpy, right? Just by nature, but they're good scouts. And the reason that they're good scouts is because if you inflate a prospect in your head, you're going to over evaluate them in a positive way and then overdraft them, and that burns you. And that's why some scouts pull back and basically force a prospect to come to them. Right. And that's what you see when it comes to the Cole Caulfields and the Chaz Luciuses and a lot of other prospects is it's like, okay, you're very talented, but there's things here that are definitely warning signs. And because of that, people draw back a little bit. Now, in the case of Cole Caulfield, I think that one thing that actually kind of hurt him is that he was with Hughes, right? And I think that Jack Hughes, and I think that actually affects him because a lot of people are going to say, well, what happens when he's not with with a player like that? What happens when he's not on the best program assembled over the last decade, which he was, right? It also comes down to the fact that I'm going to give Cole Caulfield some credit here. He improved in some ways that are more difficult to improve in, specifically with his playmaking. And now you could make an argument, hey, if you're a world-class sniper, the last thing I want you to do is pass the puck. And that's true to a degree. But what is helping Cole Caulfield here was when he developed his playmaking in college and brought it to the NHL, it allows him to reopen himself after giving somebody the puck and then being able to reopen up his hips and receive a pass in his wheelhouse. So it gave him more options in terms of how he sets up his give and go sequences, how he works in transition, right? It gave him more than what we thought was there when we initially looked at him. Now, again, one thing too I'll say about Cole Caulfield and Chaz Lucius, when they're scoring, they're extremely useful players. What happens when they're not? And in the case of Cole Caulfield, that was the real deciding factor in terms of what can he bring to a playoff series when he is cold, right? He's 5'6", 5'7". He's a decent, pretty good skater. He works decently hard, but there's only so much you can do with that type of frame when you're off your game. A good example of this when he was at the U20s. So at the U20 performance, he was struggling. He was mentally not where he needed to be in terms of his goal scoring rate. And we saw a player get largely shut down, and a player like Matt Boldy, who doesn't have the same goal scoring upside, be a much more prominent player because he had so many other options and tools to use.
Yeah, there's lots that goes into scouting. And what I like about Hockey Prospect and your black book that people should highly recommend it is you really break down your rating system, and we'll put it up on the screen. You know, you guys break it down, hockey sense and compete and skill and skating, but then you go into it, with playmaking, vision, deception, first on pucks for compete, their shot accuracy, etc. It's all up there, and it's rated on a 3 to 9 scale. So in order to be an A player, and Frank alluded to, there's 18 of them this year, and I think there's 27 B players, and then you get to C plus. Out of those rankings, like, what does an A player need to get across the board in hockey sense, compete, skill, skating, and miscellaneous to be an A player at Hockey Prospect?
It really is contextually based off the player, which I'll get into a bit, but just the general sense of it, they obviously have to be good in basically everything or very well-rounded. And we prefer seeing a unique quality, something that's almost a specialization within that player that makes them excellent or exceptional relative to the crop in some area. So for instance, if you broke down William Eklund, who we have in our top 3, when you look at his skill level, okay, he's one of the most talented players in this draft. He is an elite playmaker, elite vision, elite processing ability and anticipation, spatial awareness, and how all that melds together to create some of the most dynamic plays there are, right? So when you factor in his ceiling, and then you look at his floor and you say, okay, what is he off the puck? Well, he's very good at anticipating play. He stays above the puck. He's very good at supporting along the boards, or at least learning that process. He's there willingly to learn it. And that's what you look for at this age. They don't have to be perfect, but you have to see that they have the instincts, the natural instincts and the natural tendencies to want to do it. Right? It's just work rate is an incredibly important component of this for us. If you're A-rated specifically with us, it means that there's a very, very good chance that you keep a tremendous work rate, a tremendous pace. Okay, and that's just because of the nature of the way the game is going right now. If you look at the speed of the game, it's only getting faster. Right. And what that means is that you're going to have prospects keep up with that pace, that speed. And therefore, we always look for that tremendously competitive player with an edge. Now, we do give exceptions. One is Chaz Lucius. Would we say he's a tremendously competitive player? No, but he's above average. And then the goal scoring upside, then, right, it allows him to get in that top 20 range and still be rated because of what it brings. But yeah, there's some give and take, but yeah, we definitely prefer seeing an exceptional quality, and it's all about that balance between the floor and ceiling ratio. You want to see a strong floor. One thing that Mark Edwards, our director of scouting, always emphasizes is that we are not here to just do some sort of fantasy ranking or do some sort of mock draft. That's not our job. Our job is to pretend that we are the 33rd team. Now, it's weird saying that, but yeah, 33rd team, and being able to go on this draft floor and saying, this is actually your pick. And if it doesn't work out, you have to sit down with your girlfriend or your wife or your husband, and you have to say, hey, we're moving. We messed up and we're moving. And that really changes perspective when it comes to evaluating the floor of a player and the projection of a player. I'll give you a perfect example of one. Winnipeg Jets drafted Cole Perfetti at 10th. I personally would have taken Cole Perfetti higher than that, but I definitely would have had some beads of sweat hitting my pillow for sure in the middle of the night, knowing that there is some risk here, right? He has a tremendous ceiling, but he's also not athletically very gifted, a bit smaller, not physically nearly as developed as some other kids. And that makes you really have to give yourself a second evaluation, make sure to say, would I actually do this? And that's a real fundamental difference between us and some other people that do this publicly. Because we're professionals that really do consider this a full-time job, and the vast majority are trying to be in the NHL. And so to simulate that, I think gives us an edge, and it really helps us with our evaluations.
Now, Brad, you're also the goalie scout for hockeyprospect.com. And you mentioned the 2012 draft. And funny enough, the best player from the 2012 draft now is Andrei Vasilevsky, who went 19th overall. This year, there's 2 goalies ranked. Depends on where you have them. You guys have from the Edmonton Oil Kings, Sebastian Cossa, who is number 7 on your list. And then, of course, you have Jesper Wallstedt, who is 15th. You're the goalie guy. I love having a goalie guy on because it's the position I understand the least, to be honest. Like I watch it, I get it, but there's so many little things that are just nuanced. So let's break down the 2. How close are they to begin with? And then give me your strengths and what you like about both of them and maybe how they're different.
Well, I'll start off by saying I don't know how Mark Edwards managed to convince me to become a goalie guy. For him, it's a heck of a responsibility and really, really tough to do. You know what? Goaltending scouting is incredibly difficult. It really is. One of the biggest problems with goaltending scouting is if you look at it from, say, if I'm scouting Willie Mecklin to Brent Clark, and then I have to scout Sebastian Cossa and Jesper Wallstedt, it takes me twice as long. It's a lot more in-depth process. But to get back to your question, I think they're both A-rated. I think they're both tremendous goaltenders, and I think that they have the potential to be franchise-altering goalies for the respective teams that draft them. Now, I am in the minority, at least publicly, when it comes to which goalie I prefer, and I prefer Sebastian Cossa. And the reason why comes down to how the modern system in the NHL works when it comes to goal rates. If you look at the modern game, you're seeing a lot of chaotic broken play types lead to goals, right? So you're dealing with pucks going off shin pads, pucks getting deflected and redirected off sticks. You're dealing with low to high danger lateral passes, okay, that are going through screens. You're dealing with tremendous snipers who come down the wing, like on Austin Matthews, who can mask the shooting side that they're going across the grain on when they're trying to mask their shot through a screen, for instance. It's either elite sniping, or those are the types of goals that are going in terms of the chaos plays. So if you take those into consideration and you look at goalies like Igor Shesterkin, Elvis Merzlikins, UC Saros, Andrei Vasilevsky, the list goes on. All these goalies have one thing in common, and that's they have the athletic ability necessary to recover in the time frame necessary to get to these broken types of plays. Okay, and now Sebastian Cossa has a ceiling that is reminiscent of Yaroslav Askarov, who, for your listeners, was the best goalie ranked in the 2020 draft, and for my money, arguably the best goalie I've scouted since Andrei Vasilevsky and Igor Shesterkin. So, when you look at these types of goalies, the modern day goalie is all about lateral explosiveness and these micro adjustments. It's a term that I use to refer to when a goalie misassesses the initial play type and then has to reposition themselves and square up on the second and third play types. So with Jesper Wallstedt, you're looking at almost a quote unquote throwback element to him, meaning he's a blocking style netminder who's as wide as he is tall. He's a gigantic fridge in net. Okay. He's a big kid who plays a blocking style where he's absorbing the initial shot. And because of that, I have to weight his attributes differently than Kossa's, because Cossa doesn't need the same level of puck tracking and situational awareness and reads as Wallstedt does, because he can recover at a higher rate. So when I look at Jesper Wallstedt, I say, okay, he has to be elite at puck tracking, elite at situational reads, or I can't have him in this tier range. But luckily for Jesper Wallstedt, that's exactly what makes him special. He is one of the best we've ever monitored at tracking pucks. One way I always tell people that I monitor puck tracking with goalies is that when he's looking to make a save through a screen, he's very, very good at knowing if he should actually fall into his butterfly, or if he should stay in a set position, in a set stance. And it's remarkable how consistent he is, even at the SHL level as an 18-year-old at doing this. And so when you take that into consideration and you see his development curve over the last 3 years, I think he's at the point now where his lateral explosiveness is at least average. His athleticism is at least average enough where I'm not worried about it. That said, again, I still take Cossa because even though he doesn't read the play as well as Wallstedt, he still reads the play exceptionally well in his own right. It's not elite, it's just excellent. And then when you look at the 6'6" frame and then packed in with the tools, I think the ceiling is just that high.
Brad, I'm really looking forward to seeing how the goalies play out. I wanted to ask you just to dive in a little bit more on the idea between the ceiling and the floor for a player, because I look at a guy like Cole Sillinger at number 5 as, everything that you might as well just stamp safe on his forehead. Is that the best way to describe him? Is he the safest pick in this draft?
maybe you should listen to you and draw it on his forehead for when he gets selected, because it's true. He's, when you're looking at floors, it's always about the competitiveness and the structure of the player, right? And if Cole Sillinger's not scoring, we just talked about how Cole Caulfield kind of his game gets minimized, right? When Cole Sillinger isn't scoring, he is still creating havoc. Think Brady Tkachuk. Right? Matthew Tkachuk, Brady Tkachuk type of player in terms of his instincts for the game. He's an agitator. He's somebody who will run through a guy. It's one of those situations where he'll be very physical and he'll impose his will when it comes to the forecheck. He'll impose himself on a team that makes their life uncomfortable. And you got to remember when we're doing this and we're trying to create our own ranking and our own team, our own system in terms of what we would build as a playoff contender, you're always looking for players who can make defensemen's life miserable, right? Because it's all about making sure that you can decrease defensemen's puck retrieval rates. In order to do that, you find players like a Cole Sillinger who creates a physical edge, who can impose himself on a defenseman. One thing I always say to everybody on my radio show and in podcasts is if you look at successful teams like Tampa Bay, right? Steve Yzerman largely built that back end. What's the main thing that you see within it? It's massive. It has range. It's very hard to play against, right? And the reason I think that Steve Yzerman built it in the way he did is because he built a defense that could theoretically shut him down. I think that's what he went out to do. So to counteract that, you have to go find these tenacious power forward style of players like Cole Sillinger and like a Tom Wilson or a Josh Anderson or a Boone Jenner, right? These players are extremely important even when they're not putting up points. Now, the reason we have Cole Sillinger still in our top 5 is because we think, just like Chaz Lucius, he's one of the only projectable 25 to 30 goal scorers available in this class.
Interesting. Last question for me, Brad, is Logan Mailloux at number 30. We've reported extensively on dailyfaceoff.com about his story, being charged with the crime for taking and distributing an inappropriate photograph in Sweden following a consensual sexual encounter. We know the update to the story that Logan Mailloux has renounced himself from this draft. My question is two-part. One, when you decided to rank Logan Mailloux at number 30, not going to ask if you knew about the situation, but was he ranked there based solely on his talent and playing ability? And the second part is, given that he is ranked at number 30, and even though you don't opt in or opt out of the draft, he's made this request. My understanding is that there are a number of NHL teams still considering selecting Logan Mailloux in this weekend's draft. Could you see a situation that unfolds where he actually is selected, even though he's asked teams not to?
Well, to answer the first part of your question, we basically, for every single player, rank on ice only. And the reason why is because if you took, I look at 270 kids per year. And if I had to go on ice to off ice, on ice to off ice, it creates just a tremendous amount of convoluted rankings. And it's just, there's not enough time, not enough communication, not enough, there's not enough time to go through that process. Okay. So to make to make a ranking fair and to make it consistent, we wanted to make sure we said as a staff, hey, let's rank on ice only, and we'll let the powers that be determine what happens with each kid that makes mistakes off the ice, essentially. In terms of your second question, I definitely could see a team still drafting him. depending on how the interview process goes with Logan Mailloux. You know, as you know, I know that you've been in the industry for a long time, Frank and Jason. So it's one of those situations where if a team feels comfortable with where he is mentally and in terms of his in terms of getting back on track in the future, could they end up taking him later in the draft and living with the repercussions from that? Yeah, I think that's a possibility, but I wouldn't bet it, bet either way. It will be interesting to see the ramifications for this after the Mitch Miller situation for sure.
Brad, I got a few more for you. Kind of go quick fire a little bit, just because a lot of the names at the top. Owen Power, he's already committed. He's going back to school next year. So do you foresee any player from this draft playing in the upcoming NHL season?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, if Owen Power decided not to go back to college, I would absolutely say it would be Owen Power. Based off his World Championship performance, and even before then, he looked like for sure he was ready for the NHL. Another player that I would say is NHL ready, but I don't know if he'll actually come back over to do. I think he actually just signed a contract to stay over in Sweden, which would be William Eklund. I think William Eklund is ready to play in the NHL, but I think it's smarter for him to not play in the NHL next year. I actually think it's a bad idea for most players to play in. Like honestly, if Alexei Lafreniere, you know, if I saw what I saw in the first couple of weeks, I get it. I understand that it looks a certain way if you decide to put him in the AHL. But it's one of those circumstances where, you know, it's never a good idea to rush a prospect, right? We've seen it time and time again. Yeah. So from that perspective, yeah, I don't think, besides Owen Power and William Eklund, it really depends on Matt Beniers' offseason. If Beniers can get that much stronger, then he has a chance. To start off, I'd say the wing. Like you never want to rush a center, especially in their rookie season. But yeah, with the exception of those three, I really don't think there's another player that has a chance to play next season.
Okay, we'll get to a little bit of rapid fire. It's going to be a little bit more extended today just because I'm kind of going to go off the top 10 or 12 picks. What do you like most about Simon Edvinsson?
A skating package. He's 6'5", and he's one of the best skaters in the entire draft. And we project, say he doesn't hit his ceiling, which is pretty high. He has really good set of hands. He sees the ice well. He had actually some of the most dynamic plays, but they were just very inconsistent, which is really that's really the debate with Simon Edvinsson is what exactly is he? Is he a two-way forward? Is he more of a shutdown defenseman at the NHL level, a modern day one that can, you know, make an outlet pass and really move the puck in transition? Is it one of those situations where he can't even be that and he's a puck mover? There's a lot of debate about what Simon Edvinsson is. But in terms of where I see him, I think he's going to be a dominant minute-eating two-way defenseman who can put up between 25 and 35 points for a team and can shut down teams' top lines because he's one of the best projectable defensemen off in terms of transitional rush defense. He can really absorb a rush and he can really turn a play back around in the neutral zone and get the puck moving in the right direction. We're big fans of Edvinsson, despite him being admittedly a wild card, admittedly somewhat risky.
You mentioned Beniers out of Michigan. Of course, there's three guys from Michigan potentially to go in the top 10 for sure. Who does he remind you of for fans who haven't seen him? If you were projecting him in 5 years, who would he look like currently?
He looks something like Dylan Larkin. I think Dylan Larkin would probably be the best comparable for me. I know I'm not the only one with that comparable. That's what I saw when I first saw him. I think he's a very good second line center. I would be surprised if he's a first line center based off his skill level. He's not the most dynamic player. He's not a player who projects to score, I'd say, more than 20 goals in a given season. Okay. But it's how well-rounded he is, and it's how mentally structured he is within his center foundation that makes him a pretty unique prospect. I think one of the best ways to characterize Matt Beniers is that he's more than the sum of his parts.
Mason McTavish. What do you like best about him, and what could he bring to any NHL team?
Mason McTavish has one of the best development curves in this season. And what I mean by that is if you take a player like Zayd Wisdom, okay, drafted last year, 4th round by Philly, was a Kingston Frontenac. He was somebody where if you told me he was even a draft in his -1 season, I'd tell you there's no way. And then you see him, what he transformed into in the second half, we put him in our top 35. right? And that's the development curve of the player. He went from a no draft to us and his -1 to a top 35 player. That is a skyrocketing projection. Tim Stützle did something similar where we thought he'd be top 15. Never in a million years do we think he'd be potentially better than Lafreniere by the end of the season. And we had him in the same tier range. We had Lafreniere and Stützle literally tied in a tier 1 range together. And it's all about that curve. When you're looking at, as a scout, you're always looking at development curves. And that's what we love about Mason McTavish. Mason McTavish has a tremendous curve where he really improved his speed. He improved his playmaking. He learned what he needed to be in terms of creating efficient offense. And so that he's more than just a shooter, which he was primarily when he was playing the OHL last season, or I'm sorry, the previous season before the season. But yeah, when he got his opportunity to play against men in Switzerland, he took off and he looked fantastic.
Dylan Guenther from the Edmonton Oil Kings, absolute rocket of a shot. He had 24 points. I know it's a small sample size and only 12 games, but you average 2 points a game in your draft year. You're going to get noticed, of course. So then he scored 4 goals in 7 games at the U18s. What do you like best about Guenther? Who does he remind you of?
Dylan Guenther. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Dylan Guenther in terms of upside. In terms of who he reminds me of, oh man, off the top of my head, I don't know if there's a player that I can think of that he's kind of his own thing. One thing I always say is, like, when it comes to prospects, I usually don't like player comparables because I find it like devalues that the kid has an individual base of his own, if that makes sense. Yeah. But in Gunther's case, like, I really think that he projects to be a 60 to 65 point, 30 goal scorer. And you can't say that about a lot of kids in this draft. He's also somebody that don't be surprised if he goes higher. Don't be surprised if he goes top 3 or 4. I wouldn't be shocked if a team says, hey, he might be the best scorer in the draft, and if things go really right, he might end up the best player in this draft. There's a tremendous amount of potential with Dylan Guenther. The U18s might have hurt him, despite the point totals you see. He did not have a very good U18 performance. It's interesting. I think in a normal year he would be probably top 5. But in this season, maybe it pulls him back. But again, if a team takes him top 3, don't blink. I wouldn't be shocked.
And Kent Johnson is, to me, one of the more intriguing players because, people are like, hey, if he can put some weight on him, he's pretty slender right now. And so is Guenther. And that's where I think part of the tough part about projections is just the strength. But man, when you look at Hockey Sense and a lot of things, Kent Johnson, to me, might be the most interesting of the top 10 prospects.
Yeah, we had him top 2 to start the season. And there was a reason for that. And that's because he is absolutely one of the most dynamic and creative and experimental players on the ice. And I use the term experimental because it segues into the fact that he played in the BCHL heading into college. And I bring up the fact he played in the BCHL, which for your listeners it's not the equivalent of the Q or the dub or the O by any stretch of the imagination. It's a weaker league and allows him to get away with some tendencies that he's not going to be able to get away with in college. And so it took him a bit longer to look like the player we were envisioning heading into the season. Okay. That said, if you were to say talent-wise, where does he rank in this draft class out of the forwards? He's top 3. He's right there with William Eklund. He's remarkably creative. He's a very good playmaker. His hands are dynamic. The big thing with him is that we don't think he's the goal scorer we first thought he did. We first thought he was, and that's I'd say maybe what has limited him in terms of our ranking for him. And then the other aspect of this is he a winger or is he actually a center? There's a bit too much experimentation. There's something we call risk assessment. We always look for players who understand how to navigate risk within their position. Meaning, if he's in the defensive zone, we don't want to see him make a beautiful highlight reel, no look spinning pass when he doesn't need to. Right? We want him to be more efficient. It's wonderful that he can do those things, but we want him to do those things in the right areas of the ice at the right time. And he's still in that development period where he's trying to learn that process. Now, if he can get there, then you can project him as a center. If he cannot get there, then you project him as a winger. And then again, that decreases his value slightly.
And lastly, Luke Hughes and the Hughes brothers. If Luke Hughes is drafted in the top 10, they'll be the first ever in NHL history to have 3 brothers all drafted in the top 10. The Sutters went 4th, 10th, and 11th, but they didn't get 3 in the top 10. The Stalls had 2 number 2s and a number 12, never 3 in the top 10. And, Luca had a funny quote that caught people's attention when, what's the difference between him and his brother? Quinn goes, well, I'm 6'2". So how do you project him maybe just to his brothers? How different is he? And what's he going to bring?
Okay. So the thing with Luke Hughes is, like his brothers, elite skating base. right? That's the first thing you look at. He's just one of the most gifted skaters in this draft by a mile. The other aspect that's interesting about Luke Hughes is he's grown recently a lot. When he was, only 2-3 years ago, he was about 5'10", 5'11". Now he skyrocketed up to 6'2". Now the question becomes, okay, with a 6'2" frame that you're filling out, maybe there's more defense here than we first thought. Maybe he can actually become a much better defender than his brother Quinn, right? And that's where things get very interesting with his projection. Now, does he have the vision of his brother, Quinn Hughes? Does he have the playmaking ability? Is he as talented naturally? I don't think so, personally. But that doesn't mean he's not a fantastic defenseman in his own right. He still has a lot of upside. He still has a tremendous transitional game in terms of projection. He's somebody who can carry the puck through all three zones, but he can also make passes too. It's just, unlike Quinn Hughes, he doesn't have the same level of spatial recognition. He can inadvertently skate himself into bad areas of the ice. He also is prone to making passes or pass attempts that are not necessary, or putting himself in positions he doesn't need to be put in. So he's more raw. There's a lot more projection with him relative to his brother at the same age. That said, do I think he goes in the top 10 just because of the skating base and the skill set alone? Yes, I do. So I think the Hugheses will be able to be proud and say they are the first three-brother unit to come in the league in the top 10 at the same time.
Brad, great in-depth analysis, man. We appreciate it. I highly recommend anybody who's a draft junkie, you want to get the hockey prospect, go to hockeyprospect.com, get the black book. And the great part about it is it has like handwritten notes of the scouts and what they think of players. So you know that it's real. And then also it has a projection for next year. So you can get a jump on that, hockeyprospect.com, the black book. Brad, we really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us on the DFO Rundown.
Thank you, Brad.
Thanks, guys. I had a lot of fun. It was great being here.
That was Brad Allen, delivered by DoorDash, and real good insight, Frank. Clearly, you can tell a guy who's passionate about scouting has done his homework.
Yeah, so good. And what's awesome about the black book is not just all the info. Like, it's not just good to have this book before the draft today. It's also good to have it after the fact, to know who you picked, who your team picked, and learn a lot more about that guy, and also maybe some other guys in your team's division that you want to know more about. And the thing is, this has got everybody, because, there's a lot of focus on the first rounders, but ultimately, if you want to be 400 and some players here. Yeah. Look at Tampa Bay. Look at how many of their picks came from the second, third, fourth rounds that were huge players. Kucherov, Point, Killorn, Palat, then undrafted guys too, like Johnson and Gord. So it definitely makes a big difference for sure. Frank, this will be an interesting weekend. Of course, the draft goes tonight and tomorrow. And then free agency begins on Wednesday. So fun question before you leave. How many NHL players are traded today or tomorrow? I'm going to say 6. 6? Ooh, I like that number. Okay. All right. There's always something that you're just not thinking of. Like, I had a pretty good idea that things were off the rails with Alex Nedeljkovic. I didn't think they were going to trade him. I thought eventually this would just, maybe they go to ARB, they work itself out. Like, that to me was a little bit of a surprise. Do you think Bernier's signing in Carolina? That I don't know. I think they're going to try, but here's the thing. I can tell you that I know what Nedeljkovic asked for. And I tweeted it, $3.5 million, which seemed really reasonable. But they were trying to pencil him in and trying to squeeze him to get around 175. That's a long way off. And obviously they weren't going to bridge the gap. But my guess is, knowing kind of how Carolina operates, is that they'd want to get Jonathan Bernier on 175. So if he's willing to do it, then I'd say it probably gets done. And if not, he's like, I'll just go to market. All right. Well, Frank, we will talk to you on Monday. Enjoy the draft.
Thanks for listening to the DFO Rundown with Saravalli and Gregor. Keep it locked on dailyfaceoff.com and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from to never miss an episode.